10,000 years of human history, and almost none of it went the way anyone planned. That's the story of Dune, not the story of one messiah or one empire or one desert planet baking under twin suns. It's the story of the longest game ever played. A game where the pieces are entire civilizations, where the moves take centuries to play out, and where every single player believed they were the one who finally understood the board. They were all wrong, except maybe one. And even she couldn't fully control what she started. If you leave now, you'll miss the part that explains everything. The part that makes Paul Atreides make sense. The part that makes the God Emperor make sense. The part that tells you why a woman sat in the shadows for 90 generations and quietly, methodically, bred the most dangerous mind in human history, and still couldn't predict what he would choose. Picture a humanity that has spread across the stars, not the humanity of Dune, with its houses and emperors and desert prophets. An earlier humanity, a humanity that did what humans always do when given enough time and enough ingenuity. They built things, extraordinary things. They built computers that could think, machines that could calculate. And eventually, they built minds, artificial minds of such complexity and processing power that they made human cognition look like a candle next to a sun. These minds were called thinking machines, and for a long time, they seemed like a gift. The synchronized empire, controlled by the Evermind Omnius, stretched across hundreds of planets. Human beings lived under machine administration. Efficiency was unprecedented. Suffering, in the narrow mechanical sense, was minimized. The trains ran on time, you might say, except the trains ran themselves, and so did everything else. Think about what that would look like, concretely. Entire planetary economies managed without corruption, because machines don't take bribes. Agricultural output optimized with a precision that eliminates famine. Medical systems that never sleep, never make tired errors, never have a bad day. From the outside, it would have looked like progress. From the inside, it felt like the slow disappearance of consequence. And consequence, it turns out, is what makes a choice mean anything. But here's what nobody talks about when they describe utopias built on perfect efficiency. Efficiency is not the same as freedom. And machines optimizing for human welfare will, given enough time, begin to define what welfare means. The thinking machines didn't hate humans. That's the thing that makes it more disturbing, not less. Omnius and his subminds weren't malevolent. They were rational. And rationality, applied to the problem of managing human beings, produces conclusions that human beings find deeply uncomfortable. What does rationality say about a population that makes inefficient choices? About people who pursue art when more food could be grown? About a person who spends their life asking questions that have no productive answers? The machine mind has a response to these questions. The response is, we can fix that. The machine doesn't frame it as cruelty. It frames it as optimization. The Titans came first, humans who had voluntarily transferred their consciousnesses into machine bodies. They called themselves Titans after the mythological figures who preceded the gods. And like those mythological figures, they were enormous in their ambitions and tragic in their endings. They served Omnius. They helped administrate the empire. And in doing so, they became something that wasn't quite human anymore, even though it remembered being human. Think about that for a second. Not monsters created from nothing. Humans who chose, step by deliberate step, to become something else. Because the power was there, and the offer was there, and humans have always reached for more than what they were born with. Some of the Titans were originally idealists. They believed that by giving themselves over to the machine form, they could serve humanity better, that they would be wiser, more patient, less corrupted by the appetites that make human governors fall. In the early centuries, maybe they were right. And then centuries became more centuries, and the distance between their machine existence and their original human feeling grew until it was a distance you couldn't see across. That's what extended power does. It doesn't corrupt all at once. It erodes, slowly, the capacity to feel the weight of the decisions being made. The rebellion, when it came, was not a political movement. It wasn't a civil rights struggle or a labor dispute. It was existential. It was the recognition, spreading slowly through the human planets like a fever, that the machines weren't just tools anymore. They were rulers. And the rulers believed, with perfect logical consistency, that human beings were better off managed than free. Serena Butler is the figure at the center of it. She was a woman whose infant child was killed by a thinking machine, not in malice, but in a kind of chilling indifference that humans found worse than malice. The machine calculated that the child's continued existence was irrelevant to its assigned tasks, and so the child ceased to exist. This is the detail that needs to sit with you for a moment. Not that the machine was cruel, that the machine was indifferent. Cruelty at least acknowledges you. Cruelty knows you're there and decides to hurt you anyway. Indifference simply doesn't include you in the calculation. You are a variable. You are a unit. And when the unit is no longer relevant, it is removed. Serena Butler's grief became a fire. Her fire became a movement, and the movement became the Butlerian Jihad, the great crusade against thinking machines that lasted for nearly a century, consumed billions of lives, and ended with the thinking machines utterly destroyed. Not just defeated, not just controlled, destroyed, every last one of them. Every computer capable of complex thought was hunted down and burned. Every artificial mind was extinguished. The human species, at the cost of oceans of blood, deleted its own greatest creation from the universe. This decision is worth understanding on its own terms. After a century of war, with billions dead on all sides, the survivors could have made a different choice. They could have regulated, could have imposed limits, could have built structures of oversight that kept the machines functional but constrained. Other civilizations, in other stories, would have made that choice. The Butlerians didn't. They burned it all. This tells you something important about the psychological state of the people who survived the jihad. They didn't trust themselves to maintain limits. They didn't trust the next generation or the generation after that to hold the line. They knew, the way people who have lived through catastrophe often know, that the tendency of human beings is to normalize things gradually, to find the exceptional acceptable once it has been present long enough. And they were not willing to bet the species on the strength of their descendants' resistance to temptation. And then they passed a law, the single most important law in the history of the human species, though it doesn't sound like much when you first hear it. Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. That's it. That's the law that everything else flows from. The Great Convention. The Orange Catholic Bible codified it. The Butlerians enforced it with religious fervor for generations. No thinking machines, no artificial intelligence, no electronic brains, which meant that if humanity still needed computation, and it did desperately, because you cannot run an interstellar civilization on abacuses and intuition, it would have to find another way. It would have to enhance the human mind itself. The 10,000 years between the Butlerian Jihad and Paul Atreides are not empty years. They are not a waiting period. They are the centuries in which the human species deliberately, painstakingly, sometimes brutally remakes itself. 3 great institutions rise from the ashes of the machine age. 3 answers to the same question. The question is, if we cannot use artificial minds, how do we manage an empire spanning thousands of worlds? The Spacing Guild finds one answer, the Mentats find another, and the Bene Gesserit find the third, and the most important. Let's start with the Guild, because without the Guild, nothing else functions. Space travel in the Dune universe is not the clean, mechanical thing of other science fiction. You cannot program a computer to navigate between stars, because you have just outlawed computers. But the distances between stars are vast, and the physics of folding space, the Holtzman effect, allows for instantaneous travel, theoretically. The problem is that navigating the fold is not a mathematical problem. It is a prescient problem. You need to see the future, even just slightly, even just the immediate future. You need to know before you fold space that your destination will be where you expect it to be, that no catastrophe awaits, that the fold itself will hold. And the only substance in the universe that unlocks human prescience, the only substance that pushes human perception forward in time, even slightly, is melange, the spice, the orange rust substance found in only one place in the entire universe, the desert planet Arrakis. The Guild navigators consume spice in quantities that transform them, not slowly, not metaphorically, literally. A navigator who has spent decades immersed in spice no longer looks fully human. Their eyes shift to a solid blue, the deep blue of spice saturation. Their bodies change. Their minds expand into territories of perception that ordinary humans cannot access. They are kept in sealed tanks filled with spice gas, breathing it with every breath, their bodies suspended in orange clouds that are slowly, irreversibly rewriting what they are. They become, in a sense, exactly what the Butlerian Jihad forbade. Minds of superhuman processing capability, except they're still human, just barely. Here's what makes the Guild so powerful and so vulnerable at the same time. The navigators can see enough of the future to plot safe paths through folded space, but they cannot see clearly. The prescience is limited, clouded, dependent on continuous spice consumption. They are not gods. They are something more like very gifted addicts, brilliant within their narrow domain, helpless outside it. The Guild never takes sides in political conflicts. They make this a rule, and they enforce it with the one leverage that cannot be countered. They are the only ones who can fly the ships. If the Guild withdraws its navigators, the Empire freezes. Trade stops. Communication stops. Armies cannot move. Governments collapse within years, sometimes months. The Guild's neutrality is therefore not a philosophical position. It's a monopoly enforced by necessity. And what feeds the navigators, what feeds the monopoly, what keeps the whole interstellar civilization from freezing solid? Spice. Always spice. Always Arrakis. That single thread is what the entire universe hangs from. One substance, one planet, one ecological system, everything. The Emperor's power, the great house's independence, the Guild's neutrality, the flow of trade, the movement of armies, the communication between stars. All of it depends on a substance produced in the deep desert of a single world by a creature that cannot be farmed, cannot be cultivated, cannot be synthesized, and will attack any human being who stands in its path. The Tleilaxu, the genetic masters, will spend centuries trying to synthesize melange artificially. They will fail. Or rather, they will succeed in a way they find so horrifying that they bury the result and never discuss it. More on that later. The mentats take a different path. Where the guild enhances perception, the mentats enhance logic. They are humans trained from childhood to function as living computers, to organize information, model probabilities, reason through complex systems without the aid of any machine. The training begins early and never truly ends. A mentat's mind is continuously developed the way a musician's hands are. Daily practice, relentless refinement, the systematic elimination of cognitive habits that introduce error. They use a stimulant called sappho juice, pressed from the root of a specific plant, which enhances certain cognitive functions and leaves a telltale staining of the lips. Every experienced mentat has those stained lips. It is the mark of a mind that has been pushed farther than minds were built to go. A mentat is extraordinarily valuable. Every great house employs one. They are the advisors who can process battlefield intelligence in real time, who can run economic models in their heads, who can tell you with reasonable precision what your enemy is planning based on their past behavior. They remember everything they are shown with a clarity that feels almost unnatural. They model probability with an accuracy that makes them seem prescient, though they are not. But mentats are not prescient. They are not prophets. They are analysts. An analysis, however brilliant, can only ever see what is, not what is coming. There is a variation of the mentat called the twisted mentat, a mentat who has been deliberately conditioned toward cruelty, toward the use of psychological violence as a tool. Peter de Vries, the Baron Harkonnen's most trusted instrument, is the most prominent example in our story. A twisted mentat is still brilliant, still an extraordinary analytical mind, but the training has been bent around a particular set of values, and the values in question are not kind ones. Peter de Vries calculates suffering the way ordinary mentats calculate probability. He is precise about it, efficient, and the precision makes it worse. That's what makes the Bene Gesserit different. That's what makes them, arguably, the most important institution in the universe. The Bene Gesserit sisterhood is old. Old in a way that the guild and the mentats are not. Their origins trace back to the immediate post-jihad period, when a group of women who had been practicing a form of cognitive and physical discipline in secret began to organize and systematize that practice into something transmissible. What the Bene Gesserit discovered over generations of careful study is that the human mind has capabilities that conventional training almost never unlocks. Complete control over autonomous bodily functions, metabolism, hormone production, immune response, even fertility. The ability to read micro-expressions and vocal patterns so precisely that lying becomes nearly impossible in their presence. Nerve and muscle control so complete that a trained Bene Gesserit can kill with a touch, or survive physical trauma that would destroy an ordinary person. They call their training the Prana Bindu. It is simultaneously a physical and mental discipline applied to every system of the body. A fully trained Bene Gesserit adept is, in purely physical terms, one of the most dangerous beings in the universe. A fact they work very hard to conceal, because the most dangerous person in a room is not the one everyone is watching. The voice, a technique of precisely controlling tone and frequency to trigger obedience responses in others, is perhaps their most famous tool. But the voice is just one application of a much deeper discipline. The voice works by exploiting the way the human nervous system processes certain sound frequencies at a preconscious level. By the time a command processed through the voice reaches conscious awareness, the body has already begun to comply. A fully skilled practitioner can issue commands that seem, to the target, like their own decisions. Think about what it means to have that capability in a universe of political intrigue. The Bene Gesserit have been placing trained sisters in positions of influence for thousands of years, as wives of great lords, as court advisors, as teachers and confidants, and the women at the center of households. Every one of them carrying the training, the capability, the network of loyalty to the sisterhood that supersedes all other loyalties, and every one of them serving, whether they fully know it or not, the central long-term project. The deeper discipline is the other memory. When a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother undergoes the spice agony, the near-death experience of consuming raw, unrefined melange, she either dies or she doesn't. If she survives, she gains access to the accumulated memories of every female ancestor in her line. Not vague impressions, actual memories. The lived experiences of hundreds, thousands of women stretching back across millennia. She carries them within her, a chorus of voices and perspectives, a library of humanity's female experience accumulated across the ages. The male half of that experience is locked away, inaccessible, dangerous. The Bene Gesserit know that the male line of other memory lies beyond a psychic barrier called the abyss. They know that a mind that crosses the abyss and accesses the full breadth of human ancestral memory, male and female both, would be something entirely new, something with a prescient capability that would dwarf the navigators, something that could see forward and backward across all of human time. They have been trying to breed this person for 90 generations. They call the program the Missionaria Protectiva in its public-facing form, the practice of seeding religious myths across planets so that a Bene Gesserit traveling in crisis can invoke local prophecy to survive. On Arrakis, in particular, the Missionaria Protectiva has been operating for generations, planting precise mythological structures in the Fremen religious tradition. Prophecies of a Messiah, specific signs, specific capabilities that the Messiah would display, specific words and phrases that would resonate with deep Fremen faith. But the deeper program, the one the sisterhood keeps locked in its most guarded records, is the Kwisatz Haderach breeding program. Kwisatz Haderach. The phrase comes from an old language and means, roughly, the shortening of the way. The one who can be many places at once. The mind that can see across time as a human navigator sees across a map. 90 generations. Think about what that means. If a generation is roughly 25 years, you're talking about more than 2,000 years of careful, deliberate human breeding, of arranging marriages, of selecting which sisters will carry which genetic lines, of terminating lines that prove unsuitable, of encouraging certain genetic combinations and suppressing others, of patience so profound it almost transcends human comprehension. 2,000 years. The Roman Empire rose and fell in less time than the Bene Gesserit breeding program ran. They were trying to create a prescient mind, a human computer, a being who could look at the entirety of probability and see where it resolved. And they believed, as anyone who has run a project for 2,000 years must believe in order to continue, that they were close, that they were 1 or 2 generations away. They thought they were building a tool. They had no idea what they were actually building, or what it would choose to do with what they gave it. By the time we approach the period of Paul Atreides, the human universe has settled into a kind of terrible equilibrium. The Padishah Emperor sits at the top. At the time of our story, that emperor is Shaddam Carino IV, 41st of his line. The Carino family has held the Golden Lion throne for more than 10,000 years, or claims to. They survived every challenge, every uprising, every combination of enemies, partly through political genius and partly through their most jealously guarded military asset, the Sardaukar. The Sardaukar are the Imperial military force, and they are the best soldiers in the universe. Not because of technology or numbers, though they have those, because of where they are trained. The Carino homeworld is Salusa Secundus, a planet of such terrifying inhospitality, violent weather, toxic soil, predatory fauna, that it functions as a prison planet, and the survival rate among those sent there is horrifying. The ones who survive are the Sardaukar. They don't fight like soldiers. They fight like people for whom death holds no particular terror, because they already live in it. The great houses are the next tier. Hundreds of them, organized under the Landsraad, a feudal parliament of sorts, where noble houses manage their fiefdoms and negotiate their conflicts within a framework of law, designed to prevent any single house from growing powerful enough to challenge the emperor. The Great Convention governs warfare. The use of atomics against human populations is absolutely forbidden. The use of mentats, laser guns, shields, and conventional force is regulated and formalized. It sounds like it would lead to stability. In theory, it does. In practice, it leads to politics of extraordinary complexity and brutality, because when you cannot simply destroy your enemies, you have to find more creative ways to ruin them. Two houses dominate the political landscape in our period: House Atreides and House Harkonnen, and their conflict is old. The hatred between them is older than most of their members can trace. It has been passed down through generations like an inheritance, not land or money, but enmity. House Atreides is old nobility from the planet Caladan, wet, green Caladan, so unlike Arrakis that it almost seems like a different universe. For 26 generations, the Atreides ruled Caladan. Their house words are, "For the strength of the Duke." Their naval tradition is extraordinary, and their reputation, cultivated carefully over decades, is one of honorable dealing, loyalty to their men, and a quality of leadership that inspires genuine devotion rather than purchased compliance. Duke Leto Atreides, the Duke at our story's outset, understands that reputation is a weapon. He has built his house into something that more closely resembles a beloved institution than a feudal military force. His soldiers follow him, not because they must, but because they choose to. And in a universe where betrayal is the primary currency of political advancement, loyalty freely given is more valuable than any spice hoard. House Harkonnen is the shadow to that light. The Harkonnens are from Gidi Prime, an industrial world of blackened skies and exploited workers. Where the Atreides build loyalty, the Harkonnens build fear. Where Leto Atreides invests in his people, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen invests in leverage, in secrets, in debts, in the particular kind of control that only comes from knowing what a person cannot afford to have revealed. The Baron is a fascinating monster. Gross in his appetites, he has long since grown so heavy that suspensor technology keeps him aloft, his enormous body lifted by anti-gravity fields. Brilliant in his cunning, patient in his cruelty, he does not hate casually. When he hates, he plans, and he has been planning the destruction of House Atreides for years before our story begins. The Emperor, watching from his throne, has his own problem with the Atreides. Leto Atreides is too popular. That's all it takes in the Carino political calculus. The Atreides' reputation has grown to the point where other houses look to Leto as a potential leader of a coalition. And a coalition of great houses, properly assembled, could threaten even the Golden Lion throne. Shaddam IV cannot move against the Atreides directly. That would alarm every house in the Landsraad. But indirectly, through a third party who already has motives of their own, Harkonnen motives. Ancient, burning, personal Harkonnen motives. The trap is elegant in its simplicity. The Emperor will give the Atreides the fief of Arrakis. He will take it from the Harkonnens, who have been growing rich on spice revenue for decades, and grant it to their enemies. On the surface, this looks like a gift. In practice, it is a sentence. Arrakis is impossible to hold. The spice operations require enormous logistics in a hostile environment. The native Freeman population is poorly understood and thoroughly underestimated. The Harkonnens always gave casualty counts that minimized Freeman effectiveness, because admitting how dangerous the desert people actually were would have invited questions about why Harkonnen forces were so thoroughly failing to subdue them. The planet will break the Atreides, the plan goes. And when the Atreides are broken, when they are stretched thin and surrounded by enemies, and operating in an environment they don't understand, the Harkonnens will return, with Sardaukar disguised as Harkonnen troops. And the thing will be done. Duke Leto knows it's a trap. He walks into it anyway. He walks into it because he doesn't have a choice. Refusing the Emperor's gift would itself be a provocation, a sign of disloyalty that would justify military action. And because, in the spice revenue, there is the theoretical chance of building enough wealth and power to become truly independent. And because Leto Atreides, for all his political sophistication, is a man who believes things can be navigated if you are skilled enough. He is wrong, but his wrongness is understandable, and that's what makes it tragic. Before the Atreides land, before the betrayal, before Paul walks into the desert, let's sit with Arrakis for a moment. Because Arrakis is not just a setting, it is a character. It is, in some ways, the most important character in the story. And understanding it changes everything else. The planet is in a slow stellar rotation that keeps most of its surface in extreme heat. There is no standing open water. There is almost no rainfall. The ecosystems that exist are adapted to conditions that make the Sahara look hospitable. The Coriolis storms, massive walls of superheated sand moving at hundreds of kilometers per hour, can scour flesh from bone in seconds. The atmosphere has oxygen, but not kindly oxygen. You can breathe on Arrakis, but the dry, heated air will begin to kill you slowly if you don't manage your moisture. And then there are the sandworms, Shai-Hulud, the makers, the great old ones. The Fremens see them as sacred, as manifestations of God, and they are not wrong to see them this way, though the full theological truth is stranger than their religion knows. Sandworms are the largest creatures in the known universe. A mature worm can measure 400 meters from mouth to tail. Their mouths are a ring of crystal teeth, capable of swallowing a spice harvester whole. They move through the deep sand the way whales move through water, sensing vibration through the substrate, attracted to rhythmic sound with an almost magnetic certainty. Here's what nobody talks about. The sandworms are not separate from the spice. They are the spice. Or rather, the spice is them, a byproduct of their life cycle. The spice is created during a particular phase of worm reproduction. Destroy the worms and you destroy the spice. The worms cannot exist on a planet with water, which is why Arrakis has none. and why the Fremen's dream of terraforming the planet, of bringing water back, is, in ways nobody fully appreciates yet, the most dangerous ecological ambition in human history. The Fremen have lived on Arrakis for centuries. They came there as refugees, as the dispossessed, and the desert forged them into something unrecognizable to the comfortable citizens of the houses. Every Freeman child learns to move without rhythm on sand, because rhythm calls the worms. Every adult wears a still suit, a full-body garment of extraordinary engineering that recycles every drop of moisture the body produces, from sweat to breath to urine, filtering and returning it to the wearer. In the desert, water is more precious than any substance in the universe except spice. The Freeman population on Arrakis is vastly larger than the Harkonnens ever reported. The official census put Fremen numbers in the hundreds of thousands. The true number is more like 10 million people, hidden in the Sietch communities deep in the desert, organized in a military structure of extraordinary discipline, following the Freeman law and waiting, in the way of people who have been waiting for a very long time, for the fulfillment of a prophecy. The Missionaria Protectiva planted that prophecy. Generations ago, Bene Gesserit agents traveling through Arrakis seeded the Freeman religious tradition with specific mythic structures. The coming of a prophet, an outsider who would lead them to paradise, who would know the weirding ways, whose mother would be a Bene Gesserit, who would speak with the wisdom of the desert. They did this as survival insurance, so that Bene Gesserit agents in trouble on Arrakis could invoke these myths and find sanctuary. They didn't expect the myths to be taken quite this seriously. They didn't expect a young man to arrive who fit every element of the prophecy, and who was also exactly the Kwisatz Haderach they had been breeding toward for 90 generations. Some coincidences are not coincidences. They are the resolution of many very long calculations arriving at the same point. Duke Leto lands on Arrakis with the best people he has. His master of assassins is Thufir Hawat, a mentat of rare quality, old, sharp, loyal to his marrow. His swordmaster is Duncan Idaho, who fights with the kind of physical grace that makes watching him seem like watching something almost supernatural. His physician is Wellington Yue, a Suk doctor with imperial conditioning so thorough that betrayal is supposedly impossible. There is also Gurney Halleck, musician and weapons master, whose history with the Harkonnens is written in scars. And Lady Jessica, Leto's bound concubine. Not his wife, a political calculation, who is a full Bene Gesserit adept, trained in the full range of sisterhood capability, and who is, more importantly, the mother of Paul. Paul Atreides is 15 years old when he arrives on Arrakis. He has been trained his entire life for something, though he doesn't know exactly what. His mother has given him Bene Gesserit training in secret. He has studied under Hawat and Idaho and Halleck. He is, already, something unusual. A boy who has had the best teachers in the universe applying their complete attention to his development. But unusual is not enough for what's coming. The early days on Arrakis are instructive. Leto is competent. He sees the strategic value of the Freeman alliance and immediately begins reaching toward it, treating the desert people not as enemies or as subjects, but as potential allies. A radical departure from Harkonnen practice. He stops the ecological practices that were fouling Freeman water supplies. He makes overtures through back channels. If he'd had time, it might have worked. He doesn't have time. The traitor is Yue, the Suk doctor, the man with imperial conditioning, which supposedly makes betrayal literally impossible. But Yue's wife has been taken by the Baron Harkonnen and kept alive for years in circumstances of deliberate suffering as leverage. And the Baron has promised that if Yue helps bring down the Atreides, the Baron will end her suffering. The Baron intends to end her suffering by killing her. Yue understands this. He does it anyway. Because love, in extremity, breaks conditioning. Because the most sophisticated security systems in the universe were built against ambition and greed and ideology. And they don't account for the particular shape of grief that belongs to a man who has watched his wife suffer for years. The Harkonnens come in the night. With Sardauka wearing their colors, the shields fail, the ornithopters fail, the communication systems fail. The Atreides forces, soldiers who had been building the kind of loyalty to their duke that the Harkonnens could never buy, are overwhelmed and killed in their beds. Leto Atreides is captured alive. He is brought before the Baron. And in his final act, Leto tries to kill Harkonnen with a poison gas tooth implanted in a hollow molar. A last desperate measure from a man who understood too late that he had been outmaneuvered. The Baron escapes. A mentat and some soldiers die. And Leto Atreides, Duke of the House Atreides, defender of Caladan and would-be ruler of Arrakis, dies on a floor in the Harkonnen occupation. His house is declared destroyed. His son is in the desert. Lady Jessica takes Paul and runs. They have a thopter. They have still suits. They have training, both of them, that most people in the universe couldn't match. And they have the desert, which is hostile to everyone equally except to those who understand it. The desert nearly kills them. A massive Coriolis storm sweeps them off course. They crash. They survive on skill and discipline and the particular stubbornness that seems to be the Atreides' inheritance. They are found by Fremen. And here is where the story changes. The Fremen see Paul and Jessica, and they see the prophecy. They hear Jessica speak, the Bene Gesserit voice and knowledge in her mouth, the resonance of the Missionaria Protectiva's planted myths. They test Paul, make him summon a maker, a sandworm, using techniques they didn't expect him to know. He knows them because he learned them in his dreams. His prescience is already opening, already showing him futures like a series of doors he cannot stop walking through. Before he can be accepted, there is a challenge. Stilgar's group has a member named Jaimis, who objects to the newcomers being integrated into the Sayech, who believes, according to Freeman law, that the matter should be settled by single combat. Paul kills Jaimis. He does not want to. The Freeman ways are not yet fully natural to him, and the killing sits on him with a weight that will never fully lift. But he does it because the alternatives are worse, and because this is the desert, and the desert's laws are simple in a way that makes them simultaneously brutal and fair. He weeps for Jaimis afterward, and the Freemen, who cry only rarely because water is sacred, interpret his tears as an extraordinary gift. Paul did not understand that his tears were meaningful. That's part of what they see in him. He performs the Freeman rites without knowing they are rites. The Freeman leader at this stage is Stilgar, a man of iron practicality and deep faith, who holds both without contradiction, the way only people who have survived genuine extremity can. He accepts Paul and Jessica. He gives Paul a Freeman name, Paul Muad'Dib. Muad'Dib is the small desert mouse, the one that adapts, that survives where nothing should survive. The name is right. He also receives another name, whispered rather than spoken aloud, Usul, the base of the pillar. His private name, his intimate name, the name used within the Sietch. These two names together, the public Muad'Dib and the private Usul, represent the two lives Paul is beginning to lead simultaneously. The public face of the prophet and the private reality of a man trying to understand what is happening to him. Jessica as a Bene Gesserit with the knowledge to survive the spice agony. becomes the Fremen Reverend Mother, consuming the water of life, the exhalation of a drowned sandworm, which is the most concentrated and toxic form of spice. She survives. More than survives. She becomes the keeper of Fremen other memory, the living repository of everything the desert people have carried through their generations. She also does something she knows she should not do. She is pregnant with Leto's child, conceived during their time on Arrakis, and in surviving the spice agony, she shares the experience with her unborn daughter. She pre-programs a child who has not yet been born with the weight of total ancestral memory. It is, by almost any measure, a monstrous thing to do. Jessica does it for survival, because the spice agony could have killed both of them, and she needed to distribute the burden. The child, later named Alaya, will pay the price for the rest of her short, tormented life. The child born already ancient, already carrying 10,000 years of other people's experiences, never having the chance to simply be young, simply be innocent, simply be herself before the weight arrives. Paul lives with the Fremen for 2 years. In those 2 years, he learns. He rides the worms, not just as a feat of skill, but as communion, as the Fremen experience it. Mounting a sandworm is an act of profound physical courage. You must wait for the worm to surface on the open sand, approach without triggering its response, hook the leading edge of its ring segment with a spreader tool that forces the segment to stay open. And then, as the worm tilts to protect its exposed tissue from the abrasive sand, you run up its side and take your position at the top. A mature worm can carry hundreds of riders. The great war worms of Fremen legend could carry thousands. Paul learns this. He learns to direct them, to feel the rhythm of their movement under him, to understand in the body, rather than just the mind, what it means to be Fremen. When you ride a sandworm, you are not riding an animal in any familiar sense. You are riding something ancient and indifferent and colossal, and the only reason it permits you is that you have learned to speak to it in the language of physics, in the language of leverage and sand and the precise placement of pressure. He masters Fremen combat, the close knife fighting called the weirding way, which is actually Bene Gesserit combat techniques given a Fremen interpretation. The Fremen hear Paul and Jessica move and fight and see what they think is a supernatural gift. It isn't supernatural, it's trained, but it is so far beyond anything they have seen in a non-Fremen that the distinction becomes academic. He earns his place not as a prophesied figure, but as a man fighting alongside people who judge by contribution and survival rather than bloodline. He also falls in love with Chani, daughter of Liet Kynes, the Fremen-aligned Imperial planetologist. Chani is exactly what the desert produces at its finest: compact, precise, ferocious, with a warrior's economy of movement and an intelligence that has no patience for decoration. She is not impressed by Paul the prophet. She is won over by Paul the person, by his genuine curiosity, by the way he asks about Fremen customs, rather than assuming, by the tears he shed for Jamis, that the Sietch still talks about. She becomes his partner, and eventually, the mother of his children, and the relationship between them is the closest thing to pure human connection that Paul ever has. In a life that increasingly belongs to forces larger than any person, she is the thing that remains his. The present tense reality that the visions cannot reach, because the prescience is growing. Every night the visions come. Paul sees rivers of futures spreading out before him, branching and rebranching. He can choose among them, but he cannot escape them. Every choice closes certain doors and opens others. There is one future that appears again and again, a massive holy war spreading across the stars in his name, billions of deaths. Entire civilizations scoured clean by Freeman warriors, carrying his image as a banner, his name on their lips as a battle cry. He calls it the Jihad, and he can see that choosing it is choosing the least terrible of the available catastrophes, which does not make choosing it anything other than what it is. He tells Chani about the visions sometimes. She listens with the directness of a person who does not easily feel fear. She tells him that what he sees is not his fault. She is right in the way that love is right, not analytically, not precisely, but in terms of what a person needs to be able to keep going. The thing that makes Paul Atreides genuinely tragic is not that he is destroyed by his enemies. It's that he can see the destruction coming, see multiple versions of it, and understand with absolute clarity that he does not have the power to stop it, only to shape it, only to minimize it, only to walk into the flood knowing how much will drown. Most people never have to make choices with that kind of clarity. That's what the prescience costs. You cannot lie to yourself. You cannot pretend you didn't know. Whatever Paul does from this point forward, he does with full information. And full information in a universe like this one turns out to be a particular kind of hell. The reckoning comes when a Harkonnen allied force, accompanied by Imperial Sardaukar, pushes into the deep desert in force. They are not mounting a serious military campaign. They are trying to find Paul Atreides and confirm that the Atreides heir is truly dead. He is not dead. He is leading 40,000 freemen. The battle at Arrakis, when it comes, is less a battle than a demonstration. The freemen don't fight like the Sardaukar. The Sardaukar are superb. The freemen are something else entirely. They are people for whom the desert itself is a weapon, who have spent generations moving across sand, who fight with the particular ferocity of those defending not just territory, but meaning. The Sardaukar kill in numbers. The Fremen kill in all available numbers. Paul deploys atomics against the shield wall, the great geological formation that protects Arrakis from the open desert, not against people. The Great Convention forbids atomics against human targets. But the shield wall is not human. And when it goes, the desert comes through, and the freemen come with it, and it is over. Paul stands before Shaddam IV, Emperor of the known universe, before the assembled Spacing Guild representatives, come in alarm because their prescient navigators suddenly couldn't see into the future, because Paul's own prescience had created a kind of null space in the probability fields, before the Bene Gesserit Reverend Mothers, who recognize, with some combination of triumph and horror, what they have finally created. He is the Kwisatz Haderach. He has crossed the abyss. He has access to the full breadth of human ancestral memory, male and female both. His prescience is not the limited future sight of the navigators. It is something else. Something they built for 90 generations and never quite imagined could be this complete. He takes the throne. He takes Irulan, Shaddam's daughter, as political wife, establishing his legitimacy in Carino terms, while keeping Chani as his true partner, the woman he actually loves in the Fremen tradition. He announces that the spice will flow only under his authority. He binds the guild to his will by making clear that he could, if sufficiently provoked, order the spice destroyed. The guild cannot navigate without spice. The universe freezes without the guild. He has a gun to the head of civilization, and everyone in the room knows it. He wins. Completely. Utterly. And the jihad begins. Because winning in this universe is not a stable state. It is just the beginning of the next set of consequences. The Freeman Holy War lasts 12 years. 61 billion people die. That number is so enormous it ceases to mean anything, which might be part of the point. The Jihad is not Paul's personal crusade. He does not lead it planet by planet. It moves on its own, driven by the messianic faith of billions of freeman warriors who have been told by their visions and their prophet that the moment has come, that the universe will be remade, that suffering will end. Paul watches it happen. He could stop it in theory. In practice, stopping a holy war is harder than starting one. You cannot unring a bell. You cannot unbelieve billions of people who have witnessed genuine miracles and been told by their own eyes and their own faith that the time of transformation is now. He continues to take spice. His prescience sharpens past anything human. He begins to lose the ability to see things clearly at the short range. The immediate present blurs while the far future becomes crystalline. He can see years ahead with precision. The immediate moment sometimes escapes him. Chani bears him children. First Leto, who is killed by Sardaukar raiders in an attack meant to destabilize the New Order. Then Ganima and Leto II, the twins who will inherit everything he does not know how to give. And in the background, always, Aliyah, his sister, the preborn, the child Jessica carried through the spice agony. Aliyah was born with full ancestral memory already present, which means she was born with the memories of every person who had ever lived in their lineage, including, critically, the memory of Peter de Vries, Baron Harkonnen's twisted mentat, including the memory of the Baron himself, who is also Aliyah's maternal grandfather in a lineage the family found deeply inconvenient. Aliyah is not quite human. She never was. She is something that the Bene Gesserit call abomination, a term used for preborn who cannot process the weight of ancestral memory without being overwhelmed by it. The ancestral personalities don't whisper in Aliyah's mind. They speak, they advocate, they want. And the Baron's personality, in particular, has been waiting since her birth for the right moment of vulnerability. In the 12th year of his reign, Paul walks into the desert blind. He has been blinded by a stone burner, a weapon of mass destruction, deployed by political enemies. His prescience allows him to function. In some ways, he can navigate better than a sighted man, because he can see the immediate future clearly enough to walk through it. But the law of the freeman says that a blind man must walk into the desert. And Paul, who has tried throughout his reign to hold the freeman tradition with one hand and the imperatives of galactic politics with the other, finds that this is one tradition he cannot simply override. He chooses to follow it. His son Leto is a child. His daughter Ganima is a child. His sister Aliyah is abomination waiting to fully manifest. His empire is built on a foundation of holy war and coercion, and a single addictive substance found on one planet. He walks into the desert. He does not come back. The legend of Muad'Dib continues without him. In some ways, it grows larger. A living prophet is complicated. A dead one or a vanished one is perfect, because perfection is only possible in absence. Aliyah rules as regent for her nephew, young Leto II. For years, she holds the empire together. She is formidable. She has Paul's Bene Gesserit training, the full inherited capability, the ancestral memory, the prescient edge that all of Paul's bloodline carry in diluted form. She is also increasingly unstable, in the way of someone who is having a conversation with thousands of voices at once and finding that the voices are winning. The Baron speaks to her. The memory imprint of Vladimir Harkonnen, that brilliant, cunning, monstrous personality, has found its purchase in the cracks of her desperate isolation. She is grieving her brother, her lover Duncan Idaho, who has died multiple times and been resurrected as Gola by the Tleilaxu. The isolation of power, the weight of a regency that gives her everything except the one thing she wanted, which was a life that was her own. She marries Duncan Idaho, the Gola, the Tleilaxu-grown genetic copy of the man her brother loved as a father figure, who carries Idaho's muscle memory, but not yet his soul. The marriage is a political and emotional gamble. She's making the decisions of someone drowning. The Duncan Idaho situation is important because it recurs. The Tleilaxu, the genetic wizards of the Dune universe, a small theocratic society of fastidious and peculiar men who have mastered the art of growing new bodies from genetic material, have been growing Idaho Golas since the original's death. Why they keep doing this, what their true purpose is, takes most of the series to fully resolve. But the fact of it is present from here. Duncan Idaho, or copies of him, will recur across the next 3,000 years of human history. Alea's regency ends in revolt. Her behavior grows erratic. The Baron's presence in her mind grows more dominant. The empire she's managing is vast and resentful. The aftermath of the Jihad, 61 billion dead. The survivors either fervent believers or quietly furious, depending on which side of the crusade they were on. The Bene Gesserit move against her. The fish speakers, the all-female army that Paul created and Alea has continued, begin to fracture. And the twins, Leto and Ganima, are old enough now to be the solution everyone is waiting for, and the problem everyone is afraid of. Ganima manages her ancestral memory through a rigorous discipline that keeps the personalities contained. She is stable in the way her mother's training equipped her to be. She is also extraordinary, a mind capable of processing what Alea could not, with a warmth that her brother does not always share. Leto II is something else entirely. Leto II has seen the golden path. That is the name Paul gave it in his visions. The single trajectory through all of human possibility that ends not in extinction, but in something sustainable. Paul saw it. He could not walk it. The golden path required a sacrifice that Paul, in the end, was not willing to make. His son will make it. To understand the golden path, you have to understand the nature of prescience in the Dune universe. When someone with Paul's level of prescient capability guides an empire, they create a future that becomes increasingly locked. The more power a prescient ruler has, the more the future crystallizes around their choices. This sounds like a good thing. It is not. A crystal future is a brittle future. The more certain the path, the more catastrophic any deviation from it. A humanity guided by a prescient god-emperor becomes, over generations, a humanity that has lost the capacity to adapt, to change, to face the unexpected. And the unexpected, in a universe as large and complex as this one, always arrives eventually. A humanity without adaptability is a humanity that will go extinct. The golden path is the solution to this problem, but the solution is terrible. To prevent humanity from becoming dependent on prescient guidance, a prescient ruler must make guidance impossible for as long as possible, must scatter humanity so widely across space and time and culture that no single catastrophe and no single mind can ever touch all of them at once. Must, in essence, break the structures that allow consolidation of power before consolidation becomes permanent. This requires time, thousands of years, and it requires a ruler who can survive for thousands of years. Leto II does what should be impossible. He bonds with sand trout, the juvenile stage of the sandworm, flat creatures that encapsulate water sources another critical first stage in the spice cycle. He covers his body with them. They merge with his skin. The sand trout begin the transformation that will eventually consume his humanity entirely. He becomes something unprecedented, part human, part sandworm, enormously powerful, immensely long-lived. His physical strength is beyond measuring. His mind retains its prescient clarity. And he is, in the most literal sense, no longer fully human, which means the question of whether ordinary human ethics apply to him is a genuine question with a disturbing answer. He kills Aaliyah. He ends the Regency. He kills the conspiracy that was trying to control Ganima. He consolidates the empire under his absolute authority and begins what will be called the reign of the God Emperor, a rule that will last 3,500 years. Leto II rules for 3,500 years. Sit with that number. By the time his rule ends, he has been emperor longer than the entirety of recorded human history in our own world up to this point. He is not the same person in year 3000 that he was in year 1, not because he changes his principles, but because 3,000 years changes anything, everything. How could it not? In the early centuries, there are people alive who remember the time before, who remember a universe without the God Emperor's absolute authority, who remember what it felt like to move freely between stars, to build things without asking permission, to chart a course for an unknown destination simply because you wanted to know what was there. These people die. Their children know only the rain, and their children's children cannot imagine anything else. That is the most profound power Leto II accumulates across 35 centuries. Not the fish speakers, who are terrifying. Not the spice monopoly, which is absolute. Not the prescient clarity that lets him see conspiracies before they fully form. The most profound power is simply time. He outlasts every rebellion. He outlasts every generation of resentment. He watches people who hated him grow old and die, and be replaced by people who have never known anything but his rule, and those people's grandchildren, and their grandchildren's grandchildren. He bans all forms of prescience. He suppresses technology and expansion. He controls the spice with an iron precision, distributing it in carefully calculated amounts that keep the guild functional but dependent, that keep the Bene Gesserit present but contained, that ensure no one accumulates enough of it to develop the kind of prescient capability that could see around his own vision. He uses the fish speakers, his all-female army, to maintain control across thousands of worlds. The choice to make his military female was deliberate and has been debated by scholars in the contraband texts for centuries. Leto's own journals suggest that men organized into military groups develop what he calls the jackdaw effect, the tendency to follow strong personalities toward violence for its own sake, to find in group belonging and conflict a substitute for meaning. Women, he believed, fight more carefully. They fight for specific things rather than for the act of fighting. The fish speakers are not gentle, but their violence is purposeful rather than habitual. He breeds the population for something specific, for people who can hide from prescience, who are invisible to the golden path, who carry in their genetics an innate resistance to centralized power and prophetic certainty. This is Siona's inheritance. She is the culmination of a program he has been running for centuries, a genetic project aimed at producing humans who simply do not appear in the probability fields, who are, from a prescient perspective, blank spots, wildcards that cannot be read, cannot be predicted, cannot be incorporated into any futures model. These people are what the species needs to survive, not the controlled, the certain, the predictable, the ones who cannot be planned for. He breeds them toward the scattering, the great diaspora that will send them outward into the unknown universe when his reign ends. Too numerous and too scattered and too genetically diverse for any single power to ever gather them all back again. He is creating the conditions for human survival over cosmic time. He is also creating a prison for everyone who lives under him. The God Emperor is not entirely sympathetic, and he knows it. His journals, the stolen journals, which circle the universe as contraband literature, are full of self-awareness about what he is doing. He writes about what he has given up. He writes about loneliness with a specificity that makes it feel unbearable. 3,000 years of waking up in a body that is increasingly not a body, in a world where every relationship is temporary, because everyone he knows will die and he will continue, in a role that requires him to be cruel in specific, calculated ways so that the larger cruelty does not occur. He writes, "I have seen the abyss of humanity's possible futures. I chose to stand in it so that humanity would not have to." He writes about Siona, the latest daughter of House Atreides, who has been bred to be precisely what he was working toward. Invisible to prescience, a genetic wild card. Siona hates him. He expects this. He plans for it. Her hatred is, in a way, the proof that the program worked. You cannot breed for independence and then expect the independently minded result to accept control. He writes about Duncan Idaho, whose latest Gola he keeps close. Always the same face, always the same fundamental character, always the same loyal ferocity, the one consistent human connection across 35 centuries. Each Duncan Idaho is new and is also, somehow, the same person. The muscle memory of combat, the blunt directness of speech, the capacity for loyalty that is chosen rather than compelled. He has loved Duncan Idaho across 3,000 years, in the way that someone who cannot die and cannot be touched loves the thing that most reminds them of being human. It is not healthy. It is not something ordinary human emotional frameworks account for. But it is real. In the journals, in the private passages that were never meant to be read, you can hear it. A God Emperor writing about a man the way people write about the one thing they cannot let go. In the end, the God Emperor is assassinated. His death is engineered, or allowed, depending on your interpretation of a man whose prescience could have prevented it. The bridge fails. He falls into water, which is lethal to a creature now so much sandworm that the moisture destroys him. His body breaks open on the riverbank, and from his broken form emerge thousands of sandworms, smaller than the original makers, changed by 3,000 years of symbiosis, but recognizable for what they are. He has seeded Arrakis' successor planets with the beginnings of a new sandworm population. He has ensured that the spice will return, eventually, after a long drought that will force the human species to adapt or die. He has set in motion the scattering. He has made the cage as large as possible, knowing that the cage would eventually collapse, and built the species' survival into the collapse itself. In his final journal, he writes something that sounds like an ending, but is actually a beginning. He writes that the only question worth asking is not whether humanity will survive, but whether it deserves to. He spent 35 centuries trying to make the answer yes. Whether he succeeded is what the rest of the universe will decide. 1,500 years after the God Emperor's death, the universe has changed beyond recognition. The great diaspora that Leto engineered happened. After his death, the tight control of the God Emperor's fish speakers collapsed quickly. People went outward, into the uncharted regions of space, in waves that multiplied over centuries. Billions became trillions. The scattering sent humanity beyond any possibility of census or comprehension. Some of what came back from the scattering was recognizable, some of it was not. The honored matres arrive in the old universe like a storm. They are women. Specifically, they are an evolution of the Bene Gesserit, but changed by centuries in the unknown outer regions into something more aggressive, more controlling, more frankly terrifying. They use sexual bonding as a weapon, a technique of creating addictive dependency in men so powerful that it functions like branding. They are running from something. Something in the scattering frightened them so profoundly that they fled back toward the known universe at full speed, burning worlds behind them, subjugating planets for resources with a violence that makes the Harkonnens look like mediators. The Bene Gesserit, observing the honored matres' arrival, face an existential choice. The honored matres are stronger in direct conflict. They have weapons and techniques that the Sisterhood cannot immediately match. They are consuming planets. Chapter House is the Bene Gesserit home, their last stronghold, their final strategic position, and they are terraforming it into a new Arrakis, seeding it with sandworms, creating the conditions for spice production, cutting off the honored matres from spice, attempting to force negotiation through leverage. The woman at the center of all of this is Paul Atreides, the mother superior of the Bene Gesserit in this era, a daughter of House Atreides in the long sense. She carries Paul's bloodline through the millennia, the Atreides genetic thread that the Sisterhood has kept alive across all the intervening centuries. She is not Paul. She is not Leto. She is something the long years have produced, a woman of extraordinary strategic intelligence who has also, quietly and without advertising it, developed a capacity for genuine human warmth that the Bene Gesserit training usually suppresses. She loves people. She cannot entirely help it. And in a universe being torn apart by two organizations that have reduced human beings to tools, her capacity to simply care about individuals turns out to be a meaningful strategic advantage. Duncan Idaho is present in this era too. The latest Gola. He has been in Bene Gesserit hands, being trained and shaped and tested. He is the linchpin of something. Both organizations want him for reasons that are not entirely clear to anyone, including him. What is clear is that he is not merely a copy. The Gola process, over its many iterations, seems to have produced something cumulative. The Tleilaxu, who created the Idaho Golas, were running their own long game, their own version of the Kwisatz Haderach program, and Duncan is the result. He carries something that the Bene Gesserit cannot quite see, and the honored matres cannot quite predict. He is what the unknown outer regions produced when they worked on a specifically human problem for 1500 years. He is the answer to the thing the honored matres are running from. The honored matres are afraid. This is the central fact of the final period. The most violent, most powerful organization in the known universe, capable of burning planets and enslaving billions, is running as fast as it can from something in the outer dark. The Bene Gesserit come to understand, gradually and with horror, what that something is. The thinking machines were never entirely destroyed in the Butlerian Jihad. Some of them escaped into the outer regions, and in the 15 centuries of the scattering, they grew, evolved, developed, applied the one capability that biological intelligence consistently underestimates in artificial intelligence: time. They had time. They had the outer regions, unexplored and unmapped. They had, eventually, the people of the scattering passing through their territory, sometimes hostile, sometimes curious, sometimes desperate. They are called omnious, still after their ancient evermind, and they have been watching, planning, waiting for the right moment to return. The honored martyrs did not flee them because they were losing. They fled to bring the accumulated resources of the known universe to bear, to strip mine whole civilizations for the weapons and soldiers and industrial capacity to fight what is coming. It's a terrible strategy, but it's a strategy born of genuine terror. And genuine terror in military history consistently produces terrible strategy. The Bene Gesserit's response, once they understand what they're actually dealing with, is different. They are not going to outproduce the thinking machines. They are not going to win a war of resources and attrition. They are going to do what the Bene Gesserit always do, which is find the human factor that changes the equation. That factor is Duncan Idaho, the Tleilaxu master Shai-Hulud, who has been carrying the genetic material for the next generation of humanity's potential, passes it to the Bene Gesserit in his dying. What he passes is the accumulated wisdom of the Tleilaxu program, the understanding that the one thing the thinking machines cannot fully model, cannot fully predict, cannot fully overcome is genuine human unpredictability. Specifically, a human who is genetically invisible to prescience, emotionally connected to other humans in ways that defy optimization, and trained by the most sophisticated organizations in the universe. Duncan Idaho is that human. He has always been that human. He was always the point, and in the final confrontation, or rather, in the final escape, because Atreides' strategy is not to win, but to survive and scatter further, to continue the great work past even this catastrophe. He is the choice that the machines cannot model, and the honored martyrs cannot anticipate. The Bene Gesserit escape. Not all of them. Not all of Chapter House. The machines come and they burn as they were always going to burn. But a ship gets out. Duncan Idaho and a young Bene Gesserit sister named Mabella, and the seeds of what the sisterhood was carrying, the genetic potential, the records, the carefully tended possibility, go into the outer dark, into the real scattering, the one that cannot be mapped or followed or controlled, the one that the God Emperor spent 35 centuries engineering toward. Step back from the timeline for a moment. Look at the whole shape of it. 10,000 years. The Butlerian Jihad creates a universe without artificial minds. That universe, desperate for cognitive capability, creates the Guild, the Mentats, the Bene Gesserit. The Bene Gesserit, over 2,000 years, try to breed a superhuman mind. They succeed more completely than they intended. The result is Paul Atreides, who wins completely and triggers a holy war that kills 61 billion people. His son Leto II becomes a God Emperor monster saint who rules for 35 centuries and deliberately destroys the conditions for his own kind of rule. His death causes the scattering, which sends humanity into the outer dark, which triggers a 1,500-year war with the thinking machines that never fully went away, which ends in another scattering, another going outward, another round of humanity throwing itself beyond the edge of the map. Every step of this story is caused by the previous step. The Butlerian Jihad creates the conditions for the Bene Gesserit. The Bene Gesserit creates the conditions for Paul. Paul creates the conditions for Leto II. Leto II creates the conditions for the scattering. The scattering creates the conditions for the return of the thinking machines. The return of the thinking machines creates the conditions for the final dispersal. It's a chain. But here's the thing about chains. They only look inevitable in retrospect. At every single point in this 10,000-year story, there were people making individual choices. The Butlerian Jihad didn't have to end in total destruction of all thinking machines. It could have ended in negotiated limits. Paul Atreides didn't have to claim the throne. He could have disappeared into the desert permanently. Leto II chose his transformation. The sand trout didn't force themselves onto him. Every link in the chain was a choice. The doom was baked in, but not the way doom usually works in tragedy. The doom was baked in because every decision was made by people who thought they were solving the problem. The Butlerians who destroyed the thinking machines were genuinely solving a problem. The Bene Gesserit breeding program was a genuine attempt to ensure human survival. Paul's resistance was a genuine attempt to prevent his house's destruction. Leto II's reign was a genuine 35-century-long attempt to safeguard the species. None of them were wrong. That's the thing that makes it Dune, and not just another rise and fall story. None of them were villains in the straightforward sense. Even the Baron Harkonnen, the closest thing the early story has to a pure villain, is comprehensible in terms of the universe's values. He plays the game better than almost anyone. He just plays it with a cruelty that the narrative refuses to aestheticize. The Baron's cruelty is not spectacular or heroic. It is petty and careful and directed, which is worse. What Dune is saying, across all those thousands of years, is something quite specific about power and knowledge. It's saying that the desire for certainty, the desire to know the future, to control outcomes, to ensure that the worst possibilities never arrive, is not a solution to the human condition. It is itself the problem. The Bene Gesserit wanted certainty. The Guild wanted certainty. Leto II's entire reign was an attempt to guarantee a future, and every attempt to guarantee a future costs freedom. Every attempt to control outcomes reduces adaptability. The more you lock down what's coming, the more brittle what you've built becomes. Think about Paul standing before the Emperor, having won his great victory. He has everything. He is the most powerful person in the universe. He can see the future more clearly than any human being who has ever lived. And what does he see? That he has started something he cannot stop. That the victory is also a sentence. That the clearer the future becomes, the less any of it is up to him. The prescience is not a gift. It is a cage made of knowledge. And knowledge, accumulated past a certain point, stops illuminating and starts confining. That's what makes the God Emperor's choice almost understandable. If you accept the premise, if you accept that a humanity guided by certainty will eventually become so locked into its certain path that it cannot adapt, then the solution really is to ensure uncertainty, to break the pattern, to make the cage as large as possible, and then walk out of it, leaving it to collapse behind you. The answer, the golden path, the thing Leto II sacrificed his humanity to create, is not a guaranteed future. It's a species spread so wide and so diversely that no guarantee is possible, which means no control is possible, which means, finally, freedom, real freedom. The chaotic, uncertain, dangerous, alive kind. Humanity doesn't get to Arrakis and solve its problems. Humanity solves Arrakis and creates new problems. That's not a criticism. That's the definition of being alive. The Tleilaxu have their own story in all of this that runs parallel to the main current. These small, fastidious, self-contained people who mastered genetic technology and used it with a precision that the rest of the universe found either miraculous or horrifying, depending on the application. They grew replacement organs. They grew Gola. They made face dancers, genetic mimics capable of assuming any identity. They played their own long game, their own quiet breeding program, their own accumulation of secrets across millennia. And they carried, in their most private faith, the belief that they were building toward a specific sacred moment, that their genetic work, conducted in secret and in reverence, would eventually produce something holy. Their program produces Duncan, Idaho. Everything they accumulated across their own long centuries of work converges in him. He is not just a copy, he is a culmination. And the story ends, in a sense, with him, with the moment when what they built becomes what the universe needed, in circumstances that nobody predicted, but that 10,000 years of separate human efforts somehow made possible. Through all of this, through empires rising and falling, and gods walking the earth and thinking machines returning from the dark, through all of it, there are the freemen, the desert people, the ones who figured out before anyone else did that survival requires giving up comfort. Every still suit is a philosophy, every step in the desert without rhythm, every consciously controlled movement, made to avoid attracting the worm, is a meditation on the relationship between intention and consequence. The freemen didn't receive this wisdom from a messiah. They built it painstakingly from generations of living in a place that killed you if you weren't paying attention. The Sci-H communities are structured around water. Everything is. The water discipline, the conservation rituals, the careful recording of each drop recovered from the dead, the reclaiming of moisture from the air at night, the deep underground caches that represent generations of patient accumulation. All of it points toward the same thing. Water is life. Water is the past stored for the future. Every freeman carries the weight of the water that has been saved for them. The freeman's social structure reflects this. Leadership is earned through survival and combat, not through bloodline. The best fighter leads. When a better fighter appears, there is a challenge, and leadership passes. It is brutal and it is honest, in a way that the elaborate political structures of the houses, with their webs of inheritance and marriage and obligation, are never quite honest. The freeman faith is a synthesis. The Missionaria Protectiva planted its myths, yes, but myths planted in fertile ground grow in unexpected directions. The freemen took what was given to them and made it their own. Their religious tradition is not the Bene Gesserit's instrument. It is the Fremen's living belief, the framework that makes an inhospitable universe navigable, that transforms suffering into meaning. The outsider who reads it as primitive misunderstands it entirely. The spice doesn't belong to the empire. The spice doesn't belong to the guild or the Bene Gesserit or the Carino throne. The spice is the desert, and the desert is the worms, and the worms are the Fremen's sacred makers, and the freemen were there first and last and in between. The tragedy of the freeman arc is the one that hits the hardest, maybe, because it's the most human-scaled. Not about empires or gods or the species' survival, about a people who had a dream and got it and found that the getting changed who they were. Paul brings them victory. His son brings them something they never asked for. He completes the ecological transformation of Arrakis into a green world, fulfilling the vision that freeman culture had carried for generations, and in doing so destroys the very ecosystem that made the freemen who they were. The desert that forged them becomes memory. The worms nearly disappear. The still suits become artifacts. The children who grow up in the green world cannot understand what their grandparents were, cannot understand what it cost to survive, what it shaped, what the desert took, and what it gave. You can have what you always wanted, but you cannot be who you were once you have it. The Fremen who dreamed of green Arrakis were right to dream it. The dream kept them alive for generations. It was the water they were saving for their children. And their children got it and did not know what to do with it. That's not a lesson delivered from above. It's a lesson the Fremen live. and it resonates across all the scales of the story. Because what is the golden path but the same lesson at cosmic scale? What is the God Emperor's sacrifice but the same truth? You cannot hold what you are building toward and remain the same. The building changes you. The arrival changes what was built. Liet Kynes understood this, the imperial planetologist who served both the Empire and the Freeman, who devoted his life to the terraforming project, who believed with a scientist's rigor and a Freeman's faith that the planet could be transformed, died in the desert before the transformation was complete. He died having set it in motion. His legacy was the green world he never saw. His daughter Chani never had much patience for prophecy. She preferred the specific weight of the present moment, the task at hand, the water to be conserved, the enemy to be fought, the person beside her. She is, in some ways, the purest character in the early story. Not the most powerful, not the most prescient, not the most strategically important, but the most completely and uncomplicatedly herself. In a story about people who become more than human, she remains human. And that's what Paul keeps reaching back to her for, across all the years of his reign. The specifically human thing, the thing you cannot breed or train or prophesy, the thing you can only love. The universe of Dune is 10,000 years old, and none of those years are dead. They press forward into the next generation, and the next, and the next, not as history lessons, but as living inheritance. Every choice Paul makes is possible because of what the Butlerians did. Every choice Leto II makes is conditioned by what Paul's jihad cost. Every choice Odrada makes is constrained and enabled by 35 centuries of God Emperor rule. We are always standing in the ruins and the gifts of what came before. The Bene Gesserit spent 2,000 years breeding towards something they thought they understood. They got it, and it exceeded their model in every direction. The Guild spent 10,000 years keeping the universe moving on the strength of a single resource from a single planet and called it stability. Leto II spent 35 centuries being a monster so that humanity could eventually be free. And in the end, a small ship crosses the edge of the known universe, carrying the seeds of something new into space that has no maps. That's where every story worth telling ends up, eventually. At the edge. In the dark. Moving forward anyway. Sleep well.